The most heroic thing a person can do is often the quietest. It's staying when everyone else is running. No medals, no battlefield, no weapon in his hands, just a telegraph key. And seconds to choose between saving himself or trying to save hundreds of strangers he would never meet. This is the story of Vince Coleman, the railway dispatcher who gave his life to save an entire train in one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in human history. A disaster so powerful it shattered windows over 100 kilometers away, sent a tsunami through a harbor, and momentarily erased an entire Canadian city from the map. And in the middle of that incoming darkness, one man stayed at his post. On December 6, 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia, was a bustling wartime port. Every hour, ships carrying soldiers, supplies, ammunition, and fuel moved through the harbor. Halifax was a critical artery for the Allied war effort, a city bursting at the seams. But that morning, 2 ships entered the Narrows, the tightest part of the harbor, on a collision course. The SS Mont Blanc, a French cargo ship, was sailing inward. Its hold was a floating powder keg, loaded with TNT, picric acid, benzol, and gun cotton. Sailing outward was the SS Imo, a Norwegian relief ship. Both made desperate maneuvers, both signaled warnings, neither moved in time. At 8:45 a.m., the hulls scraped together, sparks flew. Barrels of highly flammable benzol spilled across the deck of the Mont Blanc, and flames erupted instantly. Most civilians on shore saw only a ship burning in the harbor. What they didn't know was that they were watching a floating bomb. In fact, the Mont Blanc was carrying more explosive power than the blast that would later level parts of Hiroshima. Everyone on the harbor who understood the cargo knew what was coming. Sailors abandoned ship, screaming warnings as they rowed for their lives. But on the shore, the danger was invisible. Firefighters rushed toward the flames, not realizing they were feeding a bomb. Crowds gathered at the waterfront to watch the spectacle. They were just minutes from death. About a kilometer inland, at the Richmond railway station, a 45-year-old telegraph operator named Vince Coleman was preparing for the morning trains. He expected a normal day of freight cars, supply runs, and one train in particular, passenger train number 10, coming in from St. John with nearly 300 civilians on board. When Coleman looked through his window and saw the burning Mont Blanc drifting toward Pier 6, he didn't immediately grasp the danger. Not yet. Then, a sailor, breathless and terrified, ran toward the station, screaming, "The ship is full of explosives. Everyone run for your lives." The warning spread like fire. Rail workers sprinted away from the tracks. People dropped their tools and fled for the hills. Coleman and his colleague, William Lovett, ran too for a few steps. But then, something made Coleman stop dead in his tracks. Train number 10, it was already on the rails, already approaching the city, already heading straight into a death zone. If he didn't warn them, hundreds would die without ever knowing why. He turned back. He looked at his colleague and said, "That train's coming. I have to stop it." He sprinted back into the telegraph office that everyone else was desperately abandoning. He sat at the key, hands surely shaking, as smoke from the burning ship drifted into the room. And he tapped out the message that would define his legacy. "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor, making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys." Another operator down the line received it and understood the gravity. He asked what was happening, but Coleman's final, chilling words were already on the wire. Seconds later, at 9:04 and 35 seconds in the morning, the world ended. The Mont Blanc detonated with the force of nearly 3 kilotons of TNT, triggering the largest man-made explosion until the atomic age. Everything within a 2-kilometer radius was obliterated instantly. The blast wave traveled at over 1,000 meters per second. Temperatures at the epicenter reached 5,000 degrees Celsius. Buildings evaporated. Steel beams bent like clay. A pressure wave shattered nearly every window in Halifax and the neighboring city of Dartmouth. The Richmond railway station, where Coleman sat at his post, simply vanished. He was killed instantly. The explosion triggered a massive tsunami that rose from the harbor, washing over the ruins and pulling debris and bodies back out to sea. In a single moment, nearly 2,000 people died. Another 9,000 were injured, many of them blinded by flying glass from windows they were looking through. Thousands more were left homeless. But one tragedy never happened. Train number 10 never entered Halifax. Coleman's message reached the next station. The warning was passed along. The brakes were engaged just miles outside the city. Hundreds of passengers, men, women, and children, were saved because one man refused to run. The aftermath was a vision of hell. It wasn't just the explosion, it was December in Nova Scotia. A blizzard began that afternoon, burying the ruins in snow. Fires burned through entire neighborhoods. The wounded were everywhere, people blinded by shattered glass, children pulled from rubble, families searching desperately for survivors. The streets were an impassable maze of debris, fallen wires, and snow. Hospitals were overwhelmed beyond imagination. Doctors operated without anesthetic. Schools became morgues, churches became shelters, and through it all, as the city reeled in shock, one simple truth began to spread. A telegraph operator died saving a train full of strangers. But to truly understand Vince Coleman's choice, we have to understand the city he was trying to protect. In the days leading up to December 6th, Halifax was already a city on the brink. It was overflowing with soldiers, refugees, wounded men returning from the front, and families trying to escape Europe's collapsing borders. As a train dispatcher, Coleman had a front row seat to the chaos. He spent his days watching it move through the telegraph wires, convoys rushing to the front, medical trains arriving without warning, ammunition trains held at sidings. Halifax wasn't just a city at war, it was a pressure valve, one mistake away from catastrophe. When that first shockwave hit, he understood instantly. If the inbound number 10 train reached Halifax on schedule, its passengers would walk straight into a dead city. Stopping that train wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the last thing Halifax would ever ask of him. A final duty carried out in the seconds before the world turned to fire. So who was Vince Coleman, really? He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a commander. He wasn't trained for this kind of heroism. He was a father of 4, a man who loved the railway, a quiet worker who no history book would have cared about until the moment he refused to leave his post. His sacrifice became a powerful symbol of what ordinary people can do when faced with extraordinary circumstances. The world responded with shock and compassion. Within hours, rescue teams from Boston crossed the border to help the wounded, a gesture of goodwill that Nova Scotia never forgot. To this day, the province sends Boston its official Christmas tree every year, a tradition born from the ashes of 1917. Coleman's story was printed in newspapers across North America. He became known as the man who saved the train, the telegrapher of Halifax, and the last voice before the blast. Many have asked, why didn't he run? Why risk everything for people he didn't even know? The answer, I think, lies not in some abstract idea of heroism, but in a simple, profound sense of responsibility. Coleman understood that if he didn't warn that train, no one would. He was the last line of defense. And sometimes, the smallest point of failure in a system is held up by a single human being. He didn't have time to be brave. He just had time to choose, and he chose to save others. History remembers the wars, the ships, the dates, and the statistics. But survival, true survival, often comes down to individuals. A man at a telegraph key, a message tapped out through smoke, a train full of lives unknowingly passing the edge of disaster. Halifax rebuilt, the harbor returned to life, the world moved on. But every December, Nova Scotia still remembers the man who stayed at his post when the city exploded, because in those final, frantic seconds, Vince Coleman did something extraordinary. He sacrificed his life so that hundreds of others could keep theirs. And that single decision echoes through history, long after the smoke cleared. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of quiet courage.